Already. Yeah, now I'm recording. Okay. Should I start the story again for the recording? Okay, I'll do that. One of the students of the Maggid Mizrich was the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, and one of his students, Rabbi Nachum of Chernobyl, one of his oldest students, told the following story. That one day he was sitting in his Beit Midrash. He was sitting in his study hall, public study hall, and an old man came to him and said, because of your learning, because of your study and the levels of study that you've reached and knowledge that you've reached, I have come from heaven. I've been sent from heaven to teach you. I'm going to become your Maggid. Your Maggid. What's a Maggid? A Maggid is a spiritual teacher that comes from heaven. So, as I mentioned before, there are various levels of divine inspiration or incidences of spiritual awakening, if we could call it that. The lowest level is in dreams. A person is revealed, certain things about the future are revealed to a person in a dream. The next level is Elijah the prophet comes to him. A third level is when a person gets a Maggid. He gets a personal teacher that comes to him. The most famous one was the Maggid Meisharim. The Maggid, the spiritual teacher that came to Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch. He had a Maggid that came to him on a daily basis and taught him things in the Torah that he wouldn't have known by himself, that he couldn't have known by himself, and also taught him Kabbalah, actually. It's called the Maggid. Then there's another two levels where the essence of the soul reveals itself to a person, and where the soul of a tzaddik, whether living or no longer in the land of the living, comes and becomes impregnated in his soul to lead him up to a much higher level than he could ever have achieved on his own. So a Maggid is therefore a very high level. It's the third level of Ruach HaKodesh, the third level of divine inspiration. So this man comes to, this elderly man comes to Reb Nachum Chernobyl and tells him, I was sent as your Maggid. So Reb Nachum says to him, before I can accept you as my Maggid, as my teacher, my spiritual teacher, I have to ask my rabbi, I have to ask my Rav, I have to ask the Maggid Mizrich. And that's what he did. He went to the house of the Maggid Mizrich, and he said to him, he explained to him what had happened, and he said to him, should I accept him as my spiritual teacher? And the Maggid Mizrich said, did you accept anything from him up until now? And Reb Nachum said, no. I told him I had to ask permission first. So the Maggid said, it's a good thing you didn't accept anything from him, because he was sent from the other side, called the Sitra Achra, the other side, in other words, the opposite of holiness. And he would have led you to the depths of spiritual impurity. Later, Rabbi Nachum was relating this story, and he said, what gave me the courage and the wisdom to be able to refuse? After all, when a person has the opportunity to have a Maggid, a spiritual teacher, a very high level again of divine inspiration, divine guidance, why would he refuse? So he said the reason was because when I was a little child, a young boy, my mother passed away, and my father had already passed away before that. And the community put me with a foster family. And that's where I stayed. I stayed with a foster family. There were a number of other children in the family. And the woman of the house, my stepmother, my foster mother, whenever she would give us food, she would give us lunch, dinner, or whatever, she would always give me a smaller portion than she gave her own kids. But I got used to it. It was no big deal. And that's what I lived on. One day, I came home from school, from Cheder, and I was very, very hungry. And there was some food prepared, but my foster mother was not there. So I took a portion, And of course, I took the smallest portion, what I would always get of the food, and I ate it. When I came home, my stepmother, my foster mother, said to me, did you take some of the food? And I said, yes, but I didn't take any more than I would normally get. So she smacked me, and she said to me, true, you didn't take any more than you would normally get, but you still have to ask. So from there I learned that I never take anything without asking from my youth. And that's in fact what saved him from the situation. I never take without asking first. That saved him from the situation where he could have been thrown down, so to speak, into the depths of impurity by accepting teachings from this agent, this power of the other side. Now, what do we learn from the story? We learn two things, really. Of course, there are powers, there are forces of evil and forces that will and do try to turn us into agents of the negative, agents of the other side. In other words, there are teachers, spiritual teachers as well, who will direct a person into the wrong things to his detriment and to perhaps the detriment of others as well. That's one thing. But we also learn that one should have a teacher and one should ask one's teacher things before making giant spiritual steps. This is all in answer, by the way, to an email I received from somebody who asked about this particular subject. I won't mention his name here, again, because I didn't ask him if I could. So, this is a partial answer. There's another answer, another story that I would like to tell that discusses this further. This is a story about the Maggid Mezritch, who again became the chief disciple and eventually the successor to the Baal Shem Tov. Now, the Maggid Mezritch was a grown man, and he was known far and wide as a very, very great scholar and a very holy person. And he was extremely knowledgeable in all aspects of Torah study, including Kabbalah. Very, very learned, very well versed, with prodigious memory, and he didn't waste any time on foolish things like video games. Now, I know they didn't have video games in those days. We're talking about in the 1600s, 1700s. Of course, they didn't have those things, but they had the equivalent, I can assure you. So, he didn't waste any time, and he spent most of his waking hours studying. And he had become a rabbi of a town of Mezritch, and he was very very respected and revered far and wide. However, he had a certain problem, and that problem was that there was something wrong with his. He contracted some kind of illness, and he had great difficulty in walking. He had to walk with canes, and it was walking was very painful, very difficult. And although he went to many doctors and the best doctors in the area, no one seemed to be able to cure his problem. Now, his wife had heard about the Baal Shem Tov, and had heard that the Baal Shem Tov was a healer, besides being a very saintly person, and besides being a very knowledgeable person, and a Baal Shem, someone who is the master of the holy name. That's what it literally means, the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good holy name, Baal Shem Tov. Baal, master, Shem, name, Tov, good, master of the good name. So the Baal Shem Tov, whose name is Rabbi Israel. So he had a reputation as a miracle worker, especially when it came to healing. So she suggested to her husband that he go and see the Baal Shem Tov. Her husband wasn't one to not listen to his wife. After all, even Abraham was told, listen to what your wife says. So he listened to his wife, but he felt that The doctors couldn't do anything. He didn't want to. He didn't want to go to a so-called miracle worker or someone who had a reputation of a miracle worker and go that way. He didn't want to waste the time. He was a very busy man. Spent most of his time studying and teaching, and he didn't want to waste the time, which would have meant a journey of several days and a difficult journey, being that his legs were always full of pain and so on and so forth. So he didn't want to go and spend the time. Besides, he wasn't at that point in time, he wasn't a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, and there were those that who did not accept the Baal Shem Tov. They called them Misnagdim, the antagonists of the Hasidic path, because the Baal Shem Tov came along to innovate a number of different things, and they didn't like the innovations that he brought about, that he introduced. And he had a number of opponents. Now, the Maggid of Mezrich did not take a position on it, but since he did have opponents, since the Baal Shem Tov did have opponents, he didn't want to go to the Baal Shem Tov. But his good wife would not leave him alone. And week after week, she kept on urging him, I don't want to say nagging, but urging him to go to the Baal Shem Tov, and perhaps he would be able to find a cure. Eventually, when things were not getting better and no doctors were able to help him, and he tried everything, eventually he decided to give in to his wife's urging and make the journey. So he made the journey to the Baal Shem Tov. It was a journey again that took several days. And when he got there, he stayed at a little inn. And he went off to the Beit Medrash, to the study hall of the Baal Shem Tov. And what he saw there didn't particularly impress him, but he wasn't, he wasn't going to make any very quick judgments. The Baal Shem Tov, when he saw the Maggid Mezrich, understood that this was the person who would succeed him, and he would have to be very careful in attempting to draw him close. Because the Maggid already had a reputation, as I mentioned before, of being a very revered scholar, a very knowledgeable person, and so on. But the Baal Shem Tov did things in a way that he knew. So he started asking the Maggid Mezrich about this and about that and about the journey and about all kinds of things, and he didn't discuss with him any deep ideas, any Torah ideas at all. So the Maggid was a little bit disappointed, but he decided he would wait for the Sabbath, he would wait for Shabbos, and he would listen to what the Baal Shem Tov had to say during the Shabbos meals. It's a custom to hold what's called a tish. A tish really means a table, but holding a tish means that all the students come and they all sort of eat together. Could be after the meal at home, but they all eat and sing and discuss ideas. And the teacher gives over divrei Torah, words of wisdom. So the Maggid came and he listened to the Baal Shem Tov, and what he heard found favor in his eyes, but it wasn't something absolutely out of this world. It wasn't something all that special. So at some point in time, he decided that after the Sabbath, he would just leave. He would go home. He'd wasted his time, and unfortunately, he wouldn't even get to speak to the Baal Shem Tov about his legs and about his walking and so on. But there was still another 2 meals to go, so he went to the morning meal, and again the same thing. It was, he enjoyed the teachings, but he didn't see anything that was extraordinary. And again at the 3rd meal. Afterwards, before you leave, it's customary to get what's called a birchas preda, which means a blessing for departure. In other words, when you have someone that's a very famous rabbi that you came to see or whatever it is, you don't just leave without saying goodbye. You went to say goodbye and get the Baal Shem Tov's blessings. Now here the Baal Shem Tov, as soon as he walked into the study, the Baal Shem Tov said to him, they had not really spoken at all until this point in time. At this point in time, the Baal Shem Tov said to him, "They say you're a great scholar. Here, take this book." He took out a book from the shelf. Some say it was a Zohar, one of the volumes of the Zohar. Others say it was the book Eitz Chaim, written by Rabbi Yitzhak Luria. Anyway, it doesn't really matter what the book was, but he opened the book at a certain, he sort of opened it randomly, and he gave it to the Maggid Mezritch, and he said, "Here, explain this passage." So the Maggid Mezritch looks at the passage, and he gives an explanation. Now, you have to understand, the Maggid Mezritch was an extremely learned person, and he knew 60 commentaries on the Zohar. According to others, 60 commentaries in the Eitz Chaim. Probably it was the Zohar because there's more commentaries in the Zohar than on Eitz Chaim. But in any event, he knew 60 commentaries by heart. As of course, he knew the text by heart. So he gave one of the explanations. So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, "It's a good explanation, but it didn't go all the way." So the Maggid Mezritch said again, he gave over a second explanation. And again, the Baal Shem Tov said to him, "That's also good, but it's not really there." And so it happened, a third explanation, a fourth explanation, until the Maggid got a little bit frustrated. He was saying explanations that he knew were valid and he knew were true and he knew were from great Kabbalists. So I said to the Baal Shem Tov, "Well, sir, if you don't like the way I explain it, perhaps you could explain it to me." Now, this passage was about various angels that inhabit a certain world. So the Baal Shem Tov said, "Yeah, I'll explain it to you." And the Maggid said that when the Baal Shem Tov began to explain it, the room filled up with the angels that he was talking about. The room filled up with the angels that he was talking about. At that point in time, he dedicated himself, he devoted himself to the Baal Shem Tov, and that he became his teacher. He accepted him as his teacher for the rest of his life, for the rest of the life of the Baal Shem Tov, and subsequently, in fact. So, what do these two stories teach us? The first story is about the idea of Aseh L'cha Rav. In Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, as chapter 1, there are two places where it says, "Make for yourself a teacher," or "choose for yourself a teacher." It really says, "Make for yourself a teacher." But it says it in two places. One place is that one should have a teacher in intellectual matters. And in that, one should actually have not just one teacher, but many teachers. In intellectual matters, to understand things from different points of view, it's fine to have many teachers. But the first place that it says, Aseh L'cha Rav, make for yourself a teacher, it's that a person should have a leader, a spiritual leader, a spiritual guide, whom he follows. So that was the story of Rabbi Nachman of Chernobyl. He chose himself a guide. His guide was a Maggid Mezritch, and he was going to follow him. And he would ask, no matter what happened, even though he got an offer of another spiritual teacher, who claimed to be from the higher worlds, come to teach him things that he wouldn't have been able to learn himself, he nevertheless went to ask his teacher. The second story teaches us what it is that this teacher is. How do you know who your teacher is? The second story tells us that if your teacher is someone who doesn't just teach you the dry text, but brings the text alive, he brings the angels into the room, so to speak, that's when the teacher is a teacher. One can always learn from the texts as they were, or the texts as they are. There's nothing wrong with learning from texts. But the text very often is not alive until one receives sort of an inner dimension of the thing from a teacher who has experienced these things. from a teacher who's gone through it, from a teacher who's already at a higher level. Now, does that mean to say that a person will never graduate from one teacher to another? Well, it certainly is a possibility that a person could start off with a lesser teacher and then sort of graduate to a higher teacher. That can certainly happen. But how do you know, again, who the teacher is that you should be following? Someone who makes it alive for you. Someone who brings the angels into the room, so to speak. And that is the meaning of the story, the second story, the story of the Baal Shem Tov. The Magen Mezrich knew 60 commentaries on that passage that he was told to explain, that he was asked by the Baal Shem Tov to explain. He knew those 60 commentaries. He knew them well. He knew them inside out. But those commentaries weren't alive for him. The passage itself was not alive. It was text. He was an expert in text, but he wasn't an expert in the life of the inner life of the text. And that really is what the concept of Aseh Lecha Rav is all about. Someone making for yourself a teacher, or choosing for yourself a teacher. You have to find a teacher who's going to bring it alive. And that is a mission that everybody has. Everybody should have such a goal in mind. Now, it's not always easy to find a teacher who can bring things alive. It's not always easy to find somebody who's gone through all the experiences before. Nevertheless, although that may be true, choose a teacher for now until you get to that teacher who's at that higher spiritual level. Now, one thing we have to be careful of, and it's a thing that must be pointed out, is if anybody comes along, even a teacher comes along and demands absolute obedience to the way he sees things, without giving you the opportunity to question it, without giving you the opportunity to look at things from a different point of view, of such a teacher you have to be aware. Because in the worlds of truth, there are many different ways to get to the same point. And a spiritual guide is not going to, very rarely, very, very rarely would a spiritual guide lay down the law and demand absolute obedience. It may be that you would want to be absolutely obedient to your spiritual guide and follow everything that spiritual guide says, the teacher in other words. But the attitude has to be, this is what that the teacher would say, this is what I think, and this is what I think you should do, this is the way I think you should go. But leaving you to find your own solution to the ideas, your own way of getting there. I'll give you an example of this. The Torah talks about, this was a couple of weeks ago, the Torah talks about the spies that Moses initially sent into the land of Israel. And they came back and they brought a false report about the land of Israel. Later on, he sends a second set of spies, later on, 40 years later. Now, let me just explain what happened. Why did Moses, first of all, send in the spies into the land of Israel to spy out the land and so on? He sent them in to figure out exactly how to conquer the land, because they knew they would have to conquer the land. There were people living there already. They would have to conquer the land. And what's the best way to go about it? But the spies came back, and they came back with a report. We cannot conquer the land. It's impossible. The people there are giants and very, very powerful, and there's no way that we can do it. Now, hadn't they just seen all the miracles and so on and so forth coming out of Egypt? All the miracles in Egypt, the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea, and so on and so forth. They knew there were miracles, so why were they so hesitant? So on the one hand, the explanation is that they were very hesitant because they knew that going into the land of Israel, they really knew this, going to the land of Israel meant that there would be no more super miraculous things that would happen. People would have to do everything. Everything would have to be done in the natural way, in the natural realm. In other words, it would require hard work, it would require war, it would require conquering the various nations that occupy the land and so on. And they weren't ready for that. They didn't want that. They wanted this Hanhoganisis, they wanted this miraculous way of living within the clouds of glory, having the water provided for them, having their manna, the food provided. They didn't want to go into the land. So they came back and they said, no, we won't be able to go. It's impossible. We'll never be able to do it in the natural way. And therefore, of course, they would have had Siyata Dishmai, they would have had divine help. But anyway, they stayed in the desert and they had to be in the desert therefore for another 40 years. So now, they're on the edge of Israel, having walked through the desert, having traveled through the desert for 40 years. Now they're on the edge of the land of Israel again, and again Moses sent spies. This time, the spies go and spy out the land, and they conquer a part of it. The place is called Yazer. They conquered that part of the land. And they come back and tell Moses, yeah, the land is it's a beautiful land, etc., etc. This is how we can do it, and we already conquered a part of it. And you would think that, again, they went against orders. They were only told to go in and spy the land. Why did they conquer it? You would have thought that was exactly the same sin as the original spies. They went in, they were spied out the land, and they came back with a report, no, we can't do it. These went in, and instead of just coming back with a report, they went and conquered the area without being told to do so. So one of the explanations of this is, what's the difference between the first set and the second set? Is that clear? Am I clear? Yes? Okay, so one of the differences between the major difference between the second set and the first set is when a person is given a mission by the Moses of his generation, by the leader, by his teacher. The teacher doesn't tell you how to accomplish the mission. He just gives you the mission. The first set of spies were given the mission to go out and spy out the land, and they came back with their own report. They didn't just give a report about the land. They came back with their own opinions. No, we cannot conquer. The second set went in. They were there to spy out the land. The second set of spies, they were there to spy out the land. But not only did they spy out the land, they actually conquered part of it because they knew that that's what had to be done. They saw an opportunity. They grabbed it. They saw that it was possible to conquer it and easy to conquer it, and it would have been no problem. And so they did it. In other words, Moses said in both cases what the goal is. This is where you should be going. How are we going to get there? That we'll see about. We'll see later on. The first spies messed up completely. They came back and said, no, we can't. Your goal is useless. We can't do that. Impossible. The second spies kept the goal in mind. And they said, listen, we'll go halfway. We'll already conquer that area, and we'll come back and everything will be much easier from then on. And that really is the way a teacher works. He doesn't control every aspect of your life. A teacher should inspire you to be able to feel the godliness in things, but he also gives you the goal and lets you figure out how you're going to get there. It's up to you how you're going to get there. It's not up to me or I'm speaking, so to speak, as a teacher. It's not up to the teacher to tell you how to get to the goal. He can tell you what the goal is for your soul for this particular point, at this particular point in time. Of course, that goal can move once that goal is accomplished. There's another one, and so on and so forth. Tell you what the goal is, but you have to move on from there. And that is really what the Maggid Mezrich understood from the Baal Shem Tov. He understood that if he can make it alive like this, he can tell me how to bring my studies to life, he can teach me the method of doing that, then that is my guide, that's my spiritual teacher. So in the concept of Asay Lecha Rav, make for yourself a teacher, we therefore understand that it's a vital component of a person's spiritual development. Finding a teacher who can set them the goals that bring them to life, that bring the person to life. Okay, any questions?